It seems great. We have more people filing in. As you're entering, could you put in the chat your name, any organization you might be coming from, and the native lands that you are on? I'll add a link to a website that can tell you that if you are not already there. Welcome. For those who just joined, please be aware this meeting is being recorded. Everyone, as you're entering, you are welcome to put your name, any organization you are coming in with, and the native lands that you are on in the chat. My name is Michaela Stith. My pronouns are she, her, and I work with climate justice at Native Movement, which is a statewide organization working on grassroots movement building. We are here today being convened by the Alaska Climate Alliance to talk about a couple exciting opportunities for climate legislation in the upcoming year. And we have some great speakers here with us today, representing SEAC, the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, Native Movement, Renewable Energy Alaska Project, and the Inside Passage Electric Cooperative. And our speakers here today, we have Jody, who is the CEO of Inside Passage Electric Cooperative. And we have Donovan, who is the Outreach Director for REAP, the Renewable Energy Alaska Project, as well as Matt, who is the Climate Program Manager for the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council. Thanks for putting your names in the chat. We're really excited for all of you to be here and to talk about some renewable energy policies that are coming up, and that we'd love to also, toward the end of the call, hear from you all about climate change in your communities and policies that are of interest to you in the long term. But for now, I'd like to start turning it over to our speakers to begin talking about two different really important policies coming up, potentially in this next legislative cycle starting in January. So Jody, are you ready to introduce yourself?
I'm talking to the doctor right now, so can I go later? I'm sorry. I should be done almost though. Okay, thank you.
We're really lucky Jody joined us today, even in the midst of life. Thank you so much. So we are going to have Donovan speak first, introduce themselves. And this is Donovan, the Outreach Director for the Renewable Energy Alaska Project. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Donovan Rossanello. I'm the Outreach Director for Renewable Energy Alaska Project. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm zooming in from Denny Lands here in Anchorage. So super stoked to be talking about the Green Bank today with you all. And so just wanted to dive right in with what the heck is a Green Bank. So green banks are public finance institutions that use limited public dollars to carefully design and market clean energy loan programs that are designed to lower project risk and attract private banks and other investors into a large number of loan transactions. So REAP has been working since 2017 with our partners at the Connecticut Green Bank and in New York with groups like the Coalition for Green Capital to try and educate policymakers and business leaders here in Alaska about the opportunities that green banks provide with the intention of building support to ultimately establish one here in Alaska. So Financing entities like these, like I said, partner with private sector actors to de-risk or at least the perceived risks in clean energy projects and get those private partners involved in providing affordable financing for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And so an example our executive director, Chris Rose, likes to use is that a few years ago, he was looking to install rooftop solar on his home. And he went to the bank. He's got great credit and he's a member of a few different credit unions. But the best that he could get was an offer for an 8% loan that he'd have to pay back over 5 years. So that's not really a great deal. But if you were to flip that on its head and it were a 5% loan that you pay back over 8 years, it starts to make a little bit more economic sense and perhaps line up with the economic benefit that you get from generating some of your own electricity and saving on your energy bills. So as I mentioned, what these kinds of institutions around the nation do successfully is reducing the risks for these projects and getting banks involved by offering things like credit loan enhancements, as well as other kinds of financing tools that the government can offer. So one metric that we like to use for green banks is the leverage ratio. And that's essentially just the measure of how much private investment these sorts of financial tools might crowd into these sorts of energy efficiency and clean energy projects. And so across the nation, the average leverage ratio for green banks is 3.5 to 1. So essentially that means for every dollar that a green bank in the United States provides for these sorts of projects, that crowds in an additional $3.50 from the private sector, whether it's banks or investors. So that's pretty sweet. A 3.5 return right off the bat for investment from the government is a good deal. And there's also a lot of better examples across the United States. I mentioned that we've been working with the Connecticut Green Bank. They've seen leverage ratios of between 6 and 8 to 1 for their loan products and projects. And we've seen some as high as 10 to 1 across the United States. So if you think about, a $1 investment from a state green bank here in Alaska, which would add on an additional $10 in private investment, that really starts to scale out what we can do in terms of residential energy efficiency, rooftop solar, maybe even commercial energy efficiency. So that sort of leads me to why we at REAP here believe that we need a green bank here in Alaska. And I was sort of anticipating I might be coming after Jody. So I was going to lean on her expertise when it comes to the numbers behind the Renewable Energy Fund, but just some high level numbers. Between 2008 and 2015, the legislature appropriated $640 million that went to the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation's weatherization and rebate programs. And through those programs, over 50,000 homes were successfully retrofitted. So estimates are that Alaskans who took advantage of those programs saved an average of 30% on their energy bills, and those 50,000 homes on an annual basis are displacing over 25 million gallons of heating oil. So that's obviously, great for Alaskans and our energy bills, as well as our impact on climate change. And we know, from those efforts that energy efficiency pays. So given the fact that our state finances are not what they used to be, and we can't continue to offer as much grant funding as we have in the past, REAP started looking around for other models, and that's sort of how we reached the Green Bank idea. So to bring us sort of a little closer to where we are at this moment in time, wanted to just give a quick overview on what happened this past legislative session when it comes to the Green Bank. So in April of 2021, Governor Dunleavy introduced state green bank legislation that we at REAP helped develop in collaboration, like I said, with our partners at the Connecticut Green Bank and the Coalition for Green Capital. And so those were two bills. One was House Bill 170, the other was Senate Bill 123. That legislation, among other things, made the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority the home for the Green Bank, which was initially called the Alaska Energy Independence Fund. But as it worked its way through committee, ended up being called the Alaska Clean Energy Fund. So there's a lot of different aspects of the bill, and I'm going to focus on House Bill 170 because that's the one that got the furthest along. But sort of the few highlights I wanted to mention is just that it would have created the Alaska Clean Energy Program, which would have been housed within ADA, and charged with making loans and providing those other sorts of financing for sustainable energy development. It also would have created the Alaska Clean Energy Fund and allocated $20 million to that for both the sort of like stand-up costs and operational costs of hiring staff and designing those programs, as well as the capitalization to start offering those loans. And then through the committee process, there was also a huge amendment that at least 35% of the initial appropriation made to that Clean Energy Fund for loans and other sorts of financing would go to communities that either receive or have residents who receive power cost equalization. So that was a big part of the equity part of our advocacy for the Green Bank and allies across the board. And so what's happened since the last session, I'm sure we're all probably aware that the Inflation Reduction Act passed this year. And so as part of that, the federal government allocated $27 billion with a B to funding and establishing the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund within the Environmental Protection Agency. And so that's essentially, a national green bank. There's a few different buckets within that $27 billion funding. But the idea is that it's going to provide competitive funding for financial aid and technical assistance to enable zero emission technologies and projects that reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions and criteria air pollution. So that is obviously a massive amount of money and a really awesome opportunity for state green banks and other groups who are doing that sort of project financing to take advantage and really scale out their impact. So just to bring us to where we are now and what we anticipate moving forward, unfortunately, we don't have a green bank, which means the legislation did not pass and become law. And so part of that is because of opposition to housing the state green bank within ADA for, its perceived track record and all of the implications of the projects that it has pursued in the past. And so we really, heard that opposition. And so ever since the legislative session ended, we've been talking with the governor's administration as well as allies in the legislature to think about where it might be housed elsewhere, and then try and reintroduce the legislation this coming session with a lot of the same attributes, but just with a different home. And so we're confident that this next session, it will be reintroduced and the home will be the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, which, as I mentioned, has a lot of the experience and expertise related to these sorts of programs. And so we're really hopeful that with the help of our allies and other organizations, we can advocate for that effort and get it past this next session.
Thank you so much, Donovan. I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about how we can have less risky loans and being able to actually implement more renewable energy in Alaska and have it housed in the appropriate agency. And we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward. And now we'd love to hear from Jody, who works at the Inside Passage Electric Cooperative. Take it away, introduce yourself and the topic you are so passionate about.
Okay, thank you, Michaela. I apologize for my voice. I've got laryngitis and a very bad cough, and thus I'm at the doctor's office right now, so I'm just going to try to be quick and brief. My name is Jody Mitchell. I'm the CEO of Inside Passage Electric Cooperative. Some of you might be familiar with AVEC. We're kind of like the AVEC of Southeast. We have the communities of Angoon, Hoonah, Cake, Klukwan, and the Chilkat Valley. And we've been working on displacing diesel generators with small hydro projects. And they're fish friendly. They're actually more efficient in stream now than there was before. We built the projects in Hoonah and Cake. We have relied heavily on the Renewable Energy Fund. In fact, we received about $8 million from the Renewable Energy Fund for the Hoonah Gartina Falls Hydro project that we completed in 2015. And then we received $4 million from the Renewable Energy Fund for the Cake Gunnet Creek Hydro project that was completed late 2020. We have 2 more projects in the works. We're excited that there is money from the Inflation Reduction Act, but we will have to try to get some state funding to help with the match requirements for those programs. I'm really excited though that can happen, but one thing that's really critical is that we need to have the Renewable Energy Fund not sunset. I believe it's supposed to sunset next year, and also to be adequately capitalized. There was 15 million in there, I believe, and they limited it to 2 million per project, and now they've increased it back to 4 million per project. So hopefully that will work for us. The Thayer Creek project for Angoon is about a $20+ million project. And the Water Supply Creek project for Hoonah These two projects are in final design. So they are basically they're shovel ready. The Water Supply Creek project in Hoona is estimated to cost about 10 million. So that one's very doable. The Angoon one is going to be a harder lift. But there's lots of hope because of the funding sources that are coming from the federal government. So I'm going to leave it at that. And hopefully you guys can understand me. Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. We're really appreciative that you're here and taking some time out of your day to talk to us about this important issue, the Renewable Energy Fund. So this is a question for both of you. Either of you can jump in and talk a little bit more. I'm interested in knowing why right now is an important time to be talking about these issues, and knowing that we're leading up to the Alaska legislative session in January, what we might be looking at in the next few months with these policies.
Well, I think I've already said what, my piece on it is definitely to renew the Renewable Energy Fund, and also, to adequately capitalize it. At one point there was $8 million available per project. And that's back in the good old days when they would capitalize it at about 25 million per year. And since, of course, that's gone away. So, but I would hope that with the price of oil that the state will help us, especially to capture those federal dollars with non-federal match. So those are the main points I wanted to make everybody aware of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Don?
think I would probably echo Jody's sentiments for a lot of this as well. I mean, obviously, one, we need to increase the speed at which we're integrating renewable energy and energy efficiency projects so that we can mitigate, our impact on climate change and the worst impacts of that worldwide. And then also there's, and I think we'll probably get into this, further along the conversation, but there's a lot of economic benefits to building the workforce of the future here in Alaska. And so there's no time like the present to start investing. But I do think specifically related to the Green Bank, we've been advocating for this for years. As I mentioned, our REAP as an organization has. And so there's always sort of been the carrot of this National Green Bank as, the Congress has been working on this for a while now, and folks like Don Young were in support of it, and it never really passed. And so it was always sort of like this carrot that we were promising, and now it's here. And so one, that's exciting, but two, there's a lot of urgency behind that because, they just put out a request for information, and they're sort of soliciting thoughts on how exactly to form it. But after that, once that window closes in early December, they're going to be making quick decisions about, how they're going to be providing this funding and who that's going to go to. And so we need to be positioned to take advantage of this federal funding. And then I also, as I mentioned too, and Jody just alluded to, like the good old days seem to be over with a lot of the capitalization for grant programs and projects. And so the beauty of the Green Bank model is that it's sort of, it's loan programs that can offer one, the de-risking of these projects that crowd in the private investment, but also perhaps longer term, lower interest loans. And so it's not quite as good as, grant money, but it is hopefully recycled back through and used many times over as opposed to one-time grants. So I would sum up all of that I'm saying. I know that I ramble sometimes, but urgency just with regards to the timing of the federal funding, as well as just, our responsibility as citizens of the world and folks who are impacting climate change.
If I could just add quickly, IPEC has been, we implemented a heat pump rate for our customers to incentivize them to use heat pumps and use more electricity for heating instead of oil. And we have, I think since we implemented it about a year and a half ago, last I knew we had 75 on our system. And so that's really good. It helps us to sell more power and at a good rate so that it's economic for everybody. And the more we sell, of course, the cheaper it is for everybody. So You know, as a co-op, we're a nonprofit, but we do have to cover our costs. So our rates are very high, especially with diesel prices being up to $6 a gallon this year. So, but anyway, we also have some people requesting to use the heat pump rate for electric vehicles in our communities. And I knew it was just a matter of time before someone was going to do that. So I'm excited for that as well. So I got a heat pump at home and I love it. So I haven't hardly, I think I only went through about maybe 200 gallons this year of diesel. And that's the first quarter. I didn't have the heat pump. So anyway, I don't want to ramble either, but anyway,
Right.
thank you.
You both. That's really important, both taking these actions to address climate change and also to address rural energy security at the same time. So speaking of that, I'd like to pass it over to Matt with SEAC and ask how these two policies fit into this bigger picture and into the political environment in Juneau right now.
Thanks, Michaela. And I'm so grateful to Donovan and Jody for being here. I think SEAC has a couple of roles here. And one is there's so many tangents and like little side stories that we could tell about climate change and like the solutions to climate change. And one thing that's really exciting about SEAC's role in it is that we can kind of see all these different threads and make sure people like Jody and Donovan are connecting and talking, and seeing how these programs fit together, but then also like grounding it in specific problems and solutions in Southeast Alaska. So that's one part of it. I think there's things like Jody referenced how some of the projects, we need state matching funds, but there might not be enough grant funds to reach all the way to completion of the project. And that's where maybe subsidized or de-risked financing from the Green Bank could help close that gap. And those are the kind of connections that I'm really excited to help make as a part of SEAC. But then also, I think even more primarily is these are great ideas, but until the legislature passes them, they're just ideas. And so I'm really all about trying to get these across the finish line. And when I'm done talking, I'm going to drop a couple links, because even though the state legislature hasn't organized yet, it's not too soon for us to get organized. Now is exactly the right time for us to get organized. And so we're already taking petitions for the House and Senate Finance committees to support these two bills, even though we don't need to know who's on the committee to start getting petitions, because we know what we want regardless of who's sitting in those chairs. And there's a lot of reasons why this is urgent. Not only is gas expensive, but disasters like Typhoon Merbach are expensive. Village relocation is expensive. The faster we can switch to these renewable energies, the sooner people in rural communities and in urban communities can get some relief from high energy prices, and also the more likely we are to avert those kinds of disasters. Also, I think for a long time, action on climate change was seen through a partisan lens, and I think a lot of people on the left, the people who are really passionate about climate change, have maybe sometimes been guilty of thinking of it too much that way. And I want to be really clear, there's one political party that has taken a lot stronger action on climate change than the other. There's no questioning that. That's not a partisan statement. It's just a statement of fact. But here in Alaska, we have also the opportunity where someone who's considered to be very conservative, like Governor Dunleavy, has actually introduced a few climate bills. Like, he's willing to introduce something like the Green Bank, and he's willing to introduce something like a renewable portfolio standard, which we're not talking about today because it affects the rail belt, and this is more focused on Southeast. But we're in a political environment where bipartisanship is very prized, and we have a very, quote unquote, conservative governor who's willing to actually implement some significant climate action. And it's not significant enough for the scale of the crisis, but it is a really big step in the right direction. And if we can't capitalize on that, we've got to capitalize on this. If someone as conservative and skeptical of climate change as Governor Dunleavy is willing to introduce these bills, we've got to get them passed, because this is urgent. This is a crisis. And so I'm really excited to work with Michaela, all the other folks in the Alaska Climate Alliance, everyone on this call, Jody and Donovan, to get these really good ideas off of Zoom webinars, off of our Google Docs and into law. And that's what I'm excited to be here for. I'll drop those 2 links to sign to that petition now. I'm sure you guys have seen petitions like that before. You're welcome to edit it as you hear great ideas and inspiring things in this webinar, or just sign it just the way it's written. But I hope you will take a second to sign it.
Thanks so much, Matt. And thanks for putting those petitions together. I'd like to ask the same question that I just asked Matt to our other 2 panelists about the bigger picture, and you have touched already upon how these policies are important for rural energy security and climate change, but in the big picture going forward, maybe a decade, where do we want to be, and how do these policies fit into that picture? And as you start talking about that, after Matt drops these links in the chat, I also have a Jamboard that I'm going to drop in the chat. I'd love for all the people who are here to be able to either ask their questions or provide their thoughts about some of these policies and that we've talked about so far, and also answer this question about the bigger picture and what you'd like to be seeing in the next decade as it relates to climate change and energy security. Okay, I'll pass it off to Jody or Donovan.
Well, the doctor hasn't come in yet, so I'll try to jump in front. I think once IPEC is able to get the 2 small hydro projects done in Angoon and Huna, there's also a potential for a second project in Cake at Jenny Creek. Because hydro has a bigger bang for the buck, we have focused on that. But at some point in the future, I see us focusing on community solar to add more renewables to our energy portfolio. So, and in that situation, it's always better for the utility, especially small ones like ours, to own and operate those solar banks, because they're variable in nature, as you know, and we have to match whatever can't be provided with diesel. Like if a cloud goes over, we need to have control over the loads. So anyway, that's what I see beyond hydro in the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Donovan?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I sort of think of it in terms of 2 responses. The first is just reducing our energy costs and keeping resources in our local economies here across Alaska. And the second is building the workforce of the future, which is crucial for the energy transition that we're trying to build here, and a key pillar of the just transition we're working to build, especially as a lot of the legacy fossil fuel jobs are sort of displaced by these renewable energy opportunities. So that first prong there, also just wanted to again elevate what Jody said about increasing the demand for electricity in all of our communities, but also specifically in rural communities, make some of these renewable energy projects larger and therefore more economical and more enticing to investors. And then that can make it easier to have a green bank come in, de-risk them, and then partner with private banks or investors to make them happen. And so just thinking about the virtuous cycle there is always really exciting for me, but also just more broadly, these programs and projects where lower the energy burdens for Alaskans by providing that easy access to financing and allowing them to take advantage of renewable energy and energy efficiency opportunities. We're currently paying higher costs for energy than we need to. And at the same time, rooftop solar costs have reduced by like 90% over the past 10 years. There's also estimates from groups like the Alaska Housing Finance, or I forget exactly which group. I know REAP was a part of this study, but essentially estimates that as a state, collectively, we're wasting about $1 billion every year on energy. And so if we could integrate, energy efficiency and then more efficient renewable energy projects, that would help us to keep a lot of those dollars here in Alaska and not waste them. And it also opens up opportunities for private banks to get interested and involved in these sorts of loans so that someday a green bank won't even be necessary. I'll use another example that Chris Rose likes to use, which is that, the first day that a Model T rolled off the lot, you couldn't get a car loan. And it's sort of similar and is related to that anecdote I shared about him trying to put rooftop solar on his home. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is just like build awareness and experience and expertise with our private partners so that someday we won't even need a green bank, and it'll just be as simple as going to a private normal bank or a credit union and asking for a longer term lower interest loan for renewable energy projects, rooftop solar, heat pumps, all these sorts of things. And so we're trying to help just get clean energy financing to the point that thanks to the establishment of financing entities like the Green Bank, we build those job opportunities in a market. Let's see. I had one other note that I wanted to touch on as well, but yeah, really ultimately an institution like this is a way to establish a steady market flow and business community that relies on and hires more people because they know these loans will come and consumers can take advantage of them. So it's building the market, the job market, and then those job opportunities for folks who might be displaced from their current fossil fuel legacy jobs or just taking advantage of exciting opportunities in the clean energy future. So I think there's just a lot of really awesome opportunity for the workforce and for our economy more broadly.
Thank you for that.
I have one more comment. The doctor didn't come in yet, so
Go ahead.
The Alaska Marine Highway, that they're talking about making some electric ferries. And so I was at Southeast Conference about a year ago, and an engineer that's working on that he said that it would absolutely be possible to put like a trickle charge battery in, say, Angoon, once the Angoon project is up and running. And then they could swap it out when they come to Angoon, and that would help. And also it would help, obviously we sell more power if we're charging their battery for them. So anyway, hopefully in 10 years, that'll help. We can do that as well. So
I think one of the great things about this just transition that we're going through is, right now, Alaska is basically we're an energy colony. Energy is like taken out of the state very cheaply and then like brought back very expensively. And what's exciting about the renewable energy transition is that it could kind of flip that, where unless you're in Juneau, sorry folks, you're in Alaska, pretty much everyone is served by a public utility, like the one that Jody runs. And that's really cool. That's really freaking cool and like relatively unique to Alaska for 97% of the population to be served by like nonprofit community utilities. And as we switch to this electrical revolution, those nonprofit publicly owned utilities, if you live outside of Juneau, you're probably a member owner of the utility that provides you your electricity. You will be making your own power in your neighborhood, basically. And that's really cool that we'll be making our own power, not importing it from, I don't know where, and that's a gigantic opportunity to change like the nature of global politics and conflict, but also to change the nature of our economies when we're creating and using all that value in our communities instead of spending billions of dollars every year to bring that energy up from down south. And so I think that is just a huge part of what we'll see in the next 10 years is this major economic and power shift from being essentially an energy colony to being like energy independent. And that's going to happen through renewable energy.
Could I riff on that a little bit too? Because I get really excited about this workforce development stuff, and that's a big part of what REAP does, aside from the policy angle on it. And I think it's really exciting. Like Alaska is already an international leader when it comes to microgrids. to the point where we had a few, we had an islanded power systems or isolated power systems conference in Cordova this year that brought in folks from all over the world. We also had a knowledge sharing conference here in Anchorage with folks from Canada who are just wowed by all of the innovation that's happening in our rural communities. And so not only is there opportunity to develop a workforce for integrating like utility scale renewable energy projects, but we're already leading the way when it comes to integrating smaller remote power systems and renewable energy power systems in islanded communities. And if we really lean into it and scale that out with additional investment and technical assistance, I think we'll just continue to export that sort of like expertise and knowledge to the rest of the world, which I think is really, really exciting.
Thanks so much for that conversation, and you're getting people excited here in the chat. I'll just read something out loud and maybe ask a few questions from the audience. One of the comments is that we also reduce risk to Southeast Alaska and inside passage waterways by reducing the volume of fuels being barged up. It is absolutely important, this environmental justice issue. So in terms of questions, I think one of the quicker questions that we might be able to answer is whether these funds are secure in the next administration in January. Maybe Donovan?
I see Jody shaking her head, and my understanding is the answer is no. And it's one of those, like, the House could start to like play a shell game and make it hard for those funds to be dispersed. And so that I forget exactly what the timing is, but that's sort of the urgency behind at least the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund housed within EPA as part of the allocation from the Inflation Reduction Act. They have that RFI process going through, I believe, December 5th. And then soon after that, they're just going to be ramping out, like taking all of that, designing their programs and starting to get it out, hopefully before, the new crop of legislators take office. So my understanding is no, and they're moving with the speed in order to preempt that.
Interesting. Maybe somewhat related is, before Alaska's Green Bank gets established, would it be possible to use a green bank from another state or this national green bank along those same lines?
So it's an interesting question about other state green banks. I'm sure, or at least from what I've seen, a lot of these established green banks have certain charters that keep them specific to a certain region. So my gut reaction would be no, although it'd be interesting to find an example where maybe they would be willing to fund projects here in Alaska. But I'd say probably the safe answer is no for established green banks elsewhere. And then in terms of the National Green Bank, I'm looking at just the language around eligible recipients, and it says, among other things, the Clean Air Act provides that an eligible recipient is a nonprofit organization that is designed to provide capital, leverage private capital, and sort of a lot of the attributes of an established green bank. There are qualified projects as well. And those are related to reducing and avoiding greenhouse gas emissions and other forms of air pollution. So my understanding is that in order to receive a lot of these funds, you have to be an eligible recipient, which based off the language of the law, has a lot of the attributes of an established green bank. So to sort of answer the question, my understanding would be we would need to stand up a green bank in order to house a lot of those funds.
Another reason why that policy is important. I think there's another question in the chat, but Matt has answered it. This is about the role of USFS in permitting hydro projects. Do you want to raise that up, Matt, a little bit verbally?
Sure, I'm happy to. The Forest Service is not in any business of developing hydro projects, but they do have the regulatory jurisdiction over anything that happens on the Tongass or the Chugach. And I'm not very familiar with the Chugach and what's going on up there because we're the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council. But I know that the Forest Service has permitted many hydro projects and hydro project expansions in Southeast Alaska. One fun thing that I get to do, and don't get me wrong, I am a total tree hugger, but a lot of folks down south, because of the ways that dams have been built irresponsibly on major giant watersheds like the Columbia have basically gotten dams a bad name, especially with environmentalists, conservationists, who I agree with about 99% of things in most cases. And so part of the work that SEAC is doing is educating folks that actually not all hydro projects are bad. It's very possible, especially in our steep topography in Alaska, where there's a lot of watersheds that salmon simply can't get up. It's very possible to do salmon safe, salmon friendly hydro. And so there's a balancing act between making sure that we're taking good care of these lands and the wildlife that they support, that the land supports, while also not requiring too much regulatory burden, too much paperwork for important projects that are long overdue. And Thayer Lake outside of Angoon is, to me, like the flagship example of a project that is way overdue. Like, we just need to frickin' build that project.
Yeah, and coincidentally, that project is, we are working to get a special use permit from the Forest Service, and it's taking a long time. But I think it's imminent, but that has been said for a while now. So hopefully we'll get it soon. You know, tick tock. The longer we wait for these things, the more expensive the projects are. And, you know, I think anybody who's built a hydro project would agree that oftentimes you make an estimate, by the time you actually build it, inflation or some other thing has happened that has made it go over budget. And so anyway, we're anxious to get that so that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like this should be happening soon. So I'd like to invite you all again. I do see another question in the chat, which we can answer. As we're doing that, here's the link to the Jamboard. I think we'd love to hear your thoughts just through this presentation. You can create a sticky note right under the arrow on the left-hand side of that page and add your thoughts about the Renewable Energy Fund, about the Alaskan Green Bank, as we've been chatting about it. Also, any questions you might have, and also thinking longer term, like including these policies, but thinking bigger than that too, and beyond that. Where do we want to be in the next 10 years when it comes to climate change and climate policy in the state? And what policies do we need to achieve that vision? We'd love to hear from you all in Southeast about that. So as we carry on to the next question, as your brain wheels are turning, we have a question from Dick Farnell. Is REAP, or is the Alaska Climate Alliance, putting any energy into hydrogen as an energy source, and specifically hydrogen produced in Alaska?
I'll speak for REAP in that that's not a focus of ours at the moment. You know, a big focus of ours is dealing with our current energy mix and trying to integrate more renewables. And the way that I view the hydrogen question is, if we had an abundance of clean renewable energy and cheap energy, like that would be the next step, is to package it up in green hydrogen and try and export that. But it's not really a priority at the moment because we're nowhere near where we need to be on our own grid here, our own grids in Alaska.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Hydrogen is really only a good idea if you truly have excess renewable energy. You need to have a big surplus of renewable energy to make hydrogen worthwhile. Otherwise, you're just, using natural gas, which is really just robbing Peter to pay Paul from a climate change perspective. You're just adding a bunch of steps in the middle and then still ending up with a lot of pollution. And there's very few places in Alaska that actually have excess renewable energy. Juneau and Sitka might be at the top of my list, but even the amounts of renewable energy that those communities have in excess it would be appropriate to pilot a hydrogen program maybe in one of those communities, but it would just be a pilot. And what we need to really sustain that kind of economy would be much more renewable energy. And I do think that fits into that 10-year plan potentially. Something that's really important to think about with hydrogen, though, is like who's making it. You know, if it's just British Petroleum and Shell coming back into Alaska building big hydrogen plants, like I'm going to be a little skeptical. I'm going to be curious. But if it's the city and borough of Sitka or you know, the Chugach Electric Cooperative, those are publicly owned institutions that, like, I am an owner of the Sitka utility. And I think it would be really impactful for those community owned utilities to be making energy, like I was saying earlier. Now, if Shell or Tesla or some multinational company wants to come into Sitka and build a hydrogen plant in my community, I'd have some serious questions about that. But in Alaska, because so much of our energy is already made publicly, I think it's actually a really exciting opportunity.
Again, we're getting some excitement in the chat about this topic.
Yeah, could I answer that? Could I add to that question on hydrogen? Yeah, the reason why I was asking it is yesterday, a couple of days ago, I saw a article in on ktoo.org regarding major shippers now are at least talking about converting over to hydrogen for cargo vessels passing, and especially passing through Dutch Harbor was the focus of the article. And so that hooked up to two things of what I'm very interested in is hydrogen production, and then also done in Alaska, and especially in a place out on the Aleutian chain where there's probably a gigantic amount of natural energy. And I just was wondering if Reaper ACA had reached out that far, or are we still sticking closer to the populated areas?
Can I jump in and comment on that? We have been, ACA, our Regenerative Economies Working Group, have been following what's going on out in the Aleutians and the potential for geothermal development there. And I believe hydrogen is one of the byproducts that they expect to be able to turn into green fuels for ships. And there's also a big potential in green fuels for aviation. And those are hard to decarbonize sectors, shipping and aviation. And that's where green hydrogen, if it a place where we have excess renewable energy, we could have an export industry develop around those opportunities. And our report, which you can find at aknexteconomy.com, some of the reports our working group has put out deal specifically with those opportunities in green hydrogen.
Thank you for that, Kay. I'll drop the link in the chat here to aknexteconomy.com so you all could check out that report. I also see some conversation about the maritime corridors and about ports and shipping. I wonder, maybe Matt, if you might want to say anything about that piece.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. And just one note is that Jody's doctor just showed up, and so she had to go. And I just want to give like kind of a moment of appreciation for her being so dedicated to this work and the communities that IPEC serves, that she, even when she was sick, zoomed in from the doctor's office when I was like literally being like, you don't have to come, but she just really wants to be promoting these policies because they're so important. And so big thanks to Jody. She's one of my heroes in this work. On the topic of green corridors, I think, again, that's just really exciting as a way for Alaska to move into energy independence. Right now, if you look at Southeast Alaska and you just look at the bulk carbon that is emitted in Southeast Alaska, the cruise ships are actually far and away our largest single source of CO2 emissions. It's not exactly a fair comparison because they also bring up more than 1 million people. So per person, the math looks a little bit better. It's a modestly less harmful method of travel than, flying by jet. If we tried to bring 1 million people up by Alaska Airlines, that would not look good carbon wise. But it is still a huge area for improvement. And like I was saying earlier, Southeast Alaska and Alaska in general, we have massive renewable energy potential and relatively small demand. We have small rural communities. And so that means when we think about a green corridor from Seattle to Skagway, and those cruise ships are trying to fill up on hydrogen, it's going to be a very long time until Seattle or Vancouver has truly excess renewable energy to make hydrogen. We could have that kind of excess renewable energy to create hydrogen, truly sustainable green hydrogen for the cruise ships in Southeast Alaska in the next 10 years if we really put ourselves to work and could raise the money through programs like the Renewable Energy Fund. So again, I think that could be a big part of this 10-year vision that Michaela's asking us about, is not having our energy taken away for cheap prices by these multinational corporations and then sold back to us, but our communities becoming the owners and providers of these resources that will not only fuel our economies, but also solve this global existential crisis of climate change.
Yeah, speaking of community energy independence, but also just community independence, someone put in the Jamboard about where we want to be in 2030 that they'd like to have reliable ferry service with 50% or more powered with renewables that would make it so that there's environmentally friendly hydro and solar, creating this community independence. So thanks for that thought. We are getting near to the end of our call, of our forum. We have about 7 minutes left. And so I wonder if there's no other questions or comments from the audience. I'll just check to make sure no one's hands are raised. Then I'd like to ask Donovan and Matt to wrap up with a couple minutes thought about this discussion we've been having, how these policies, how do you want folks to be showing up for these policies in January, and how can we work together in order to ensure this this energy security and community independence that we've been talking about today?
Maybe I'll start and just talk about the Green Bank, and Matt can sort of sum it all up with the REF as well as just ACA's broader goals. But I also wanted to say that the work that we're doing here at REAP, I see as fitting together in a few different ways. So as Matt mentioned, we didn't talk about the renewable portfolio standard today because it's rail belt specific, but I just think there's a lot of work to be done about providing the financing opportunities, and then also just sort of getting some of our groups here in Alaska that hold the power and have been dragging their feet to start moving on these issues. And so I see the Green Bank as a part of the broader whole, statewide, as well as part of this campaign that ACA is mounting. But I think, yeah, to really sum it up, there's really exciting opportunity and urgency behind the opportunity available from the federal funding with the Inflation Reduction Act and the National Green Bank. And it's just this is what's going to fuel a lot of the change that we want to see for the clean energy economy here in Alaska and the just transition, building that workforce, accelerating a lot of these projects that will allow for keeping those resources local, as well as, just providing opportunity to Alaskans and keeping that. I think about resources sometimes in a broader sense. So not only our economic resources, but also, we've seen a brain drain here in Alaska, and there's a wealth of opportunity for building that new economy and then developing that expertise that I said that we could export to the rest of the world when it comes to microgrids and integrating renewables in isolated instances in rural communities. So I just think it's a really exciting time to be pushing a lot of these things forward and providing the opportunities to really scale that out. And there's one other point I was going to mention as well that I'm forgetting at the moment, but yeah, it's just really exciting to be in this moment right now with those opportunities coming federally, and a lot of, I was talking, this isn't the point I was going to make, but this just came to mind too. I was talking to someone who is just really knowledgeable about the legislative process and has worked in DC for a little bit. And she was just saying that you can sense it. She's not really involved with a lot of the work that we're talking about here today, but she, just from the conversations she's having with folks who are, like, she can sense that the momentum is building and we're really at this tipping point right now. And so it's an exciting moment for all of these sorts of like policy solutions. It's an exciting moment to be involved in the workforce development angle. It's an exciting moment to be a part of the educational apparatus too. REAP does some awesome work, just sharing information with young folks who are in school and just, you know, just starting to think about what their careers might entail. And so, you know, I think the Green Bank is a part of this broader whole. Really awesome work. Excited to be a part of this group. Jody's a rock star. Matt is a freaking rock star. I'm so, I don't know if I belong on this panel, but I just appreciate the time and the interest today. And I'm really excited to work with you all moving forward.
Donovan, you definitely belong on this panel, and thanks for sharing all your expertise. We didn't spend a lot of time explaining what the Alaska Climate Alliance is, but what I want folks in Southeast Alaska to know is that, like, we're not alone in wanting this. I think sometimes in Southeast, we feel like we're remote from the rest of the state, that maybe we trend a little bit more one direction politically than the rest of the state. And, you know, I just saw someone's, you know, concerned about all the funding going to the rail belt. And what's really amazing and exciting about the climate organizing that's happening right now, is that it's very coordinated. People all over the state care. This is not like a niche issue that SEAC is taking the lead on because people in Juneau are really fired up about climate change. This is something that is happening. Like, we're moving forward together as a group. We're united, and there's a lot of opportunities for us to coordinate with folks from around the state. I think as far as what we can do, there's going to be a lot going on in the legislature when it convenes. And at that time, people in Juneau and SEAC supporters are going to have a really outsized opportunity to participate. And SEAC is going to be very vocal about letting everybody know when those opportunities are. While the legislature is still organizing, I really want to drop these links to these two petitions in the chat again. And, like, please click on those links and open that tab and sign those petitions. It's the lightest lift. You know, it's the smallest step you can take, but it is the first step. And as we get closer to the legislature, you know, we're going to be hosting actions at the Capitol. We're going to be scheduling meetings with legislators. Like, I'm so grateful that Tim from Sarah Hannon's office is here. I really appreciate your interest in this issue. Jody and I are meeting with Rebecca Himshoot later this afternoon, if Jody's voice and health allows. And there's going to be, like, you don't have to wait for SEAC for these actions. Like, call your new legislator or your old legislator. It looks like Bert Stedman's going to be chairing the finance committee probably again. But get in touch with your legislators and stay in touch with SEAC, because there's going to be a lot more opportunities for action come January.
Great. Thank you both so much. I think I'm excited to be signing some of these petitions here and building up to action in January. So I'd just like to thank everybody here for coming today, for speaking about what's important to you and asking questions, and encourage you to continue filling out that Jamboard if anything comes up, because like Matt said, we didn't talk much about the Alaska Climate Alliance, but we'll be working on a long-term 10-year plan, and we would just love to have input from our communities about what we need to be working on in the next 10 years. So thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you around.
Thanks, Michaela, for facilitating, and everybody for joining.